The Vasa was the most expensive warship Sweden ever built. It sailed for less than a mile before a gust of wind flipped it over. It sank in full view of the cheering crowd who came to watch it launch. And that is not even in the top 5 worst mistakes on this list. The Vasa was built in 1628 on the orders of King Gustavus Adolphus. He demanded an unprecedented number of heavy cannons on the upper deck. The shipbuilders knew it was top-heavy. They knew it would capsize in anything but a dead calm. But the king had personally approved the design, and you do not tell a 17th century absolute monarch that his warship design is a death trap. 1,500 people watched the Vasa sink from the Stockholm harbor. The king was not in Stockholm that day. The Sultana disaster in 1865 killed more people than the Titanic, but almost no one knows about it. The Sultana was a steamboat designed to carry 376 passengers. On its final voyage, it was carrying 2,137 people, mostly Union soldiers returning home from the Civil War. Boilers exploded at 2 a.m. The river was in flood stage and freezing cold. The official death toll was around 1,200, but the real number may have exceeded 1,800. It remains the worst maritime disaster in American history. And it happened the same week Lincoln was assassinated, so the newspapers barely covered it. The Titanic was not sunk by a single design flaw. It was sunk by a cascade of them. The rivets in the hull were made of substandard iron that became brittle in cold water. The iceberg popped them like buttons. The watertight compartments were not actually watertight because their tops were open and water flowed over them like an ice cube tray. The lifeboats were insufficient because the builders thought too many boats made the deck look cluttered. And the nearest ship that could help, the Californian, had its radio turned off because the operator had gone to sleep. The Titanic was not a tragedy of nature. It was a tragedy of arrogance, multiplied by negligence. The MS Estonia sank in 1994 in the Baltic Sea. The bow visor, the giant door at the front of the ship that cars drive through, had its locking mechanisms fail during a storm. Water flooded the car deck. The ship listed, and it sank in less than an hour. 852 people died. An investigation found that the visor had been poorly maintained, and the crew had no training for this scenario. The ship that was supposed to be unsinkable by modern standards sank faster than the Titanic. The Costa Concordia in 2012 was not sunk by design flaws or bad weather. It was sunk by one man's ego. Captain Francesco Schettino ordered a close pass of an island to wave at people on the shore. He brought a 114,000-ton cruise ship within 150 meters of rocks. The ship struck a reef and began taking on water. Schettino abandoned the ship before the evacuation was complete and was later found guilty of manslaughter. The recording of a Coast Guard officer screaming at him to get back on his ship became evidence in his trial. The Halifax explosion in 1917 was technically a ship collision that destroyed an entire city. The SS Mont Blanc, loaded with 2,900 tons of explosives, collided with another ship in Halifax Harbor. The resulting explosion was the largest man-made blast before the atomic bomb. 2,000 people died instantly. The anchor of the Mont Blanc was found 2 miles away. For a few moments, the bottom of Halifax Harbor was dry because the water had been pushed outward by the blast. The USS Indianapolis delivered the components for the first atomic bomb to Tinian Island. 4 days later, on its return voyage, a Japanese submarine sank it with 2 torpedoes. 900 men went into the water. The Navy did not notice the ship was missing for 4 days. By the time rescue arrived, only 316 men were still alive. The rest had died of exposure, dehydration, or shark attacks. The captain was court-martialed for losing his ship, even though the Navy had failed to provide an escort. The worst mistake on this list is the one that almost happened. In 1983, a Soviet satellite mistook sunlight reflecting off clouds for 5 American nuclear missiles. The officer who saw the warning, Stanislav Petrov, had orders to report it immediately so the USSR could launch a retaliatory strike. He decided it was probably a false alarm and waited. One man, a computer glitch, and a decision to wait. That is what separates 8 billion people from none. Ships sink for the same reason anything fails. Someone ignored a warning. Someone rushed a deadline. Someone was afraid to tell their boss the truth. The king wanted more cannons. The company wanted a cleaner deck. The captain wanted a better view. And sailors paid for it with their lives. Subscribe for more invisible margins that shaped everything.